You probably still remember the early morning of April 21, 2025, while many were still curled up in bed hitting snooze. Over in Beijing, China's Ministry of Commerce dropped a fiery statement. China will not sit idly by if any country sides with the US and harms our interests. That declaration hit like a thunderclap on a clear day. International experts immediately sounded the alarm. Headlines blared across the media. Governments scrambled into emergency meetings, and just like that, a single question began to echo around the world. Is this the opening move in a new, even fiercer trade war? One more dangerous than anything we've seen before? Another, deeper question quickly followed. Is this truly a declaration of war from a rising superpower determined to defend its crown, or just a diplomatic bluff? China flexing its muscles to remind the world who's boss. This story isn't just about two giants clashing. It's spreading across the globe. And whether we like it or not, we might already be standing right in the eye of the storm. The trade war between the US and China is no longer just a side story. It has turned into a full-on showdown between two superpowers. It all began when the Trump administration decided to escalate the conflict by slapping a staggering 245% tariff on Chinese goods. It was a bold move, like a punch straight to the opponent's face, accompanied by a blunt message: choose the US or choose China. There's no room for neutrality. That message echoed loudly around the world, serving as a clear warning of how the US expected countries to pick a side. But China, never one to back down, wasn't going to sit still. Beijing struck back hard. They raised tariffs on US goods by 125%, sending a clear signal. Hitting back wouldn't be so easy either. And that wasn't all. China also began restricting exports of critical strategic minerals like lithium and rare earth elements, key ingredients in high-tech manufacturing. They even went as far as blacklisting American companies, targeting tech giants like Apple and Microsoft directly. These weren't just knee-jerk reactions. They were part of a long-term strategy. Carefully calculated moves in a high-stakes game of chess, preparing for an uncompromising confrontation. Both sides knew exactly what was at stake. This was no longer just about tariffs. It had become a battle to defend power, position, and influence on the global stage. So as the trade war escalated, China didn't just rely on tariffs to fight back. It also reached into its diplomatic toolbox. One of Beijing's most strategic moves was appointing Li Changgang, a seasoned diplomat at the World Trade Organization, WTO, as head of its international trade negotiation team. Li, known for his sharp negotiation skills and years of experience on the global stage, had played key roles in multiple international talks. Choosing him, a familiar face at the WTO, was no accident. It signaled loud and clear that China intended to take the fight to the arena of international law and rules, not just behind closed doors, but on the global stage for all to see. But China didn't stop at personnel. It officially filed a complaint against the US at the WTO. The goal? More than just winning a legal case. Beijing aimed to reclaim the moral high ground in this economic standoff, to paint itself as the defender of multilateral trade order, standing in contrast to America's increasingly unilateral action. Though the outcome of the complaint might take time, the move itself was a powerful counterstrike, both strategic and symbolic. By bringing the dispute to the WTO, China was saying, this fight isn't just about money, it's about principles and playing by the rules. It was a smart play, one that showed Beijing's resolve while also putting pressure on the US from a field where even Washington has to play by the book. Now, let's take a closer look at why China chose this moment to send out such a bold warning to the world. First off, the pressure from the US market is absolutely crushing. That staggering 245% tariff slapped on Chinese goods by Washington is like a heavy steel door slamming shut on Beijing's export gateway. With tariffs that high, Chinese products don't stand a chance in the American market anymore. Dan Wang, a senior analyst at Eurasia Group, even pointed out that just a 35% tariff is enough to wipe out all profits for Chinese exporters. So 245%? That's not just a message, it's a clear-cut declaration. You're out. Faced with that brutal reality, China had to find a way out, or more precisely, a new direction. And where did Beijing turn to plant its next flag of influence? Southeast Asia. But China didn't wait until the storm hit to start moving. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, it's been pumping billions of dollars into infrastructure across the region for years. From Vietnam and Malaysia to Indonesia, Chinese-backed projects, railways, ports, highways have been rising fast, each one a mark of China's growing presence. And it wasn't just about money. China went all in on diplomacy too. In April 2025, President Xi Jinping personally visited Vietnam, a trip loaded with strategic intent. The centerpiece? An $8 billion, zero-cents railway deal inked between the two nations. A huge investment, sure, but also a subtle signal, if not a quiet push. China wants Vietnam deeper inside its economic orbit. In other words, while bracing against America's blows, China is also carving out new strongholds, looking for lifelines in regions that could become its economic escape route. And that warning on April 21, it wasn't just aimed at Washington. It was a wake-up call to all the countries caught in the middle. Be careful which side you choose. As the two superpowers flex their muscles with tariffs and threats, many neutral countries find themselves caught in a bind. It's easy to say don't pick a side, but in reality, it's far from simple. Vietnam serves as the perfect example. As a major trade partner for both the US and China, Hanoi is walking a fine line between the two towering powers. The first blow came from the US, a 46% tariff on Vietnamese goods. The message wasn't explicit, but everyone understood it. If Vietnam allowed Chinese goods to be rerouted through its territory to dodge tariffs, Vietnam would bear the brunt of the consequences. Faced with this pressure, Vietnam adopted a bamboo strategy, flexible but resilient. On one hand, it continues to nurture deep economic ties with both sides. On the other hand, it tightly controls the reimport of Chinese goods to avoid being hit by Washington's wrath. But that's not all. Hanoi has also ramped up exports to new markets, seeking alternatives and reducing dependence. Despite China's substantial investments and attractive offers like the $8 billion zero-cents railway project, Vietnam isn't about to tilt entirely in Beijing's favor, thanks to the long-standing disputes in the South China Sea and strategic concerns. It's not just Vietnam that's caught in this difficult position. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and India are also being dragged into similar dilemmas. Malaysia's Trade Minister, TK Zafrul Abdul Aziz, firmly stated, "We will not choose sides." It sounds clear, but the pressure is undeniable. In a world where tariffs are used as weapons, neutrality no longer feels like a safe haven. When both the US and China are pulling, pushing, and pressuring, maintaining balance feels like walking a tightrope in a storm. Neutrality isn't just a choice anymore. It's a survival art, requiring skill, sharp judgment, and a bit of luck. In the US-China standoff, the WTO is no longer just a trade court. It has become a battleground. When China filed a complaint against the US at the World Trade Organization, it wasn't just a legal move. It was a strategic play, a soft but powerful counterattack. China wasn't just saying, "We've been treated unfairly." It was shouting, "We play by the rules." China aims to paint itself as a country that adheres to international regulations, a civilized player, in stark contrast to the image of the US as aggressive, unilateral, and bullying. In this global struggle for goodwill, even attitude is a form of power. But here's the problem. The WTO is no longer what it used to be. According to Professor Petros C. Mavroidis from Columbia University, the WTO is becoming a battlefield where major countries twist the rules to serve their own interests. Instead of being a fair dispute resolution body, the organization is caught in division. Members are increasingly polarized, and procedures are getting bogged down. This creates a dilemma for smaller countries, like Vietnam and the Philippines, who are left wondering, who can we rely on? Relying on the WTO to protect their interests is too slow, and bilateral negotiations make them vulnerable to price pressure. Caught between the two giants, these smaller nations have to be savvy in navigating the rules and cautious in protecting their interests. If they aren't careful, they could end up as collateral damage in the war between the Titans. The WTO was meant to be the peacekeeper for global trade, but in this current climate, it is struggling to prove its worth and may very well be on the verge of an unavoidable overhaul. The US-China trade war is not only affecting the two major nations, but is also creating widespread consequences globally. One of the most immediate and evident impacts is the disruption of the technology supply chain. China controls 80% of the supply of rare earth minerals, essential materials in the production of semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, and other high-tech goods. When Beijing decided to restrict the export of these strategic minerals, the result was a standstill in the entire technology sector from the US to Europe. Tech companies could no longer continue production, electric vehicles couldn't be made, and computers and phones became scarce and expensive. For the US, this means an increase in the cost of living. Each American household has to spend an additional $831.00 per year due to rising prices for everything from electronics to automobiles. In fact, inflation began to escalate and consumer confidence started to decline. People began to feel the pinch as their wallets could no longer stretch as far as before, creating an economic storm that no one could foresee. China, too, is paying a hefty price for this trade war. Businesses face countless difficulties in exporting, not only due to tariffs, but also because the domestic economy is in a state of crisis. The risk of bankruptcy and unemployment is rising. The world's second-largest economy is struggling with a severe downturn, with factories shutting down and export revenues drying up. Furthermore, the global supply chain, already fragile after the pandemic, is now at risk of breaking completely if tensions continue to escalate. Smaller countries, such as Vietnam and Malaysia, will face dual pressures. Cheap goods from China flooding domestic markets, while exports to the US are being tightly restricted. This fierce competition threatens not only domestic industries, but also hinders these nations' growth efforts as the global economy wobbles. Thus, this trade war is not just a problem for the US and China. It's a global crisis, where smaller nations must learn how to balance protecting their domestic interests while coping with the worldwide repercussions of the clash between these two superpowers. On April 21, 2025, China issued not just a tough statement, but a carefully calculated move in a long-term confrontation. Beijing is playing a dual game. With one hand, it raises the legal card, suing the US at the WTO as the defender of international rules. With the other hand, it is quietly deploying strategic economic moves, tightening rare earth exports, retaliating with tariffs, and establishing new trade alliances. This is no longer just a fight over tariffs, it is a battle for the world order. On one side, there's the US with its America First policy, defending its interests through unilateralism, unafraid to target even its allies when necessary. On the other, China is building a new network of influence, from Southeast Asia to Europe, skillfully packaging its ambitions under the guise of cooperation and shared development. The world, caught between these two extremes, now has fewer options. Countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and India are no longer just facing the tariff dilemma. They must answer the question, how can we survive when the giants on both sides are pulling our hands toward the... There is no simple answer. This is not just an economic conflict, it is a warning to the world. The global order is changing, and no one can remain outside of it. So, is China's warning a way to intimidate neutral nations, or is it an actual declaration of war against the West? Perhaps it is both, a multi-layered message aimed at many targets with the same underlying content. That time you choose a side, and if you don't, you will still have to play this game. In a world increasingly polarized, living with uncertainty and balancing between opposing pressures may be the only path forward. Although precarious, it may incur the least loss.